When did you graduate from Shimer? Did you graduate?
1971.
And where was the school at the time?
Mount Carroll.
How was your experience in Shimer?
It was very intense, very eclectic. I made many good friends, some of whom I still know. I was fascinated. Part of the reason I came to Shimer was I was an early entrant. So I was one of those classic Shimerians who was bored in high school. My way of dealing with that was just to get straight A's, working as little as possible. I was ready to do something that was more challenging. Mm-hmm. So I heard about Shimer. There was a lot of publicity about Shimer at the time, in the national press as well as, the Chicago Tribune and the like, and I grew up in Zion, so, I saw all that stuff. And, so they accepted me in, the spring of '67, and I came in the fall of '67. Now that was a really interesting time in America. Probably the closest equivalent would be to what's going on now. You had all kinds of protests against the Vietnam War. You had black riots all over the place, towns all over the country. The next year you had King and Robert F. Kennedy get shot. You had, all kinds of, you had the Democratic National Convention in '68. This was all before I was, I was about as far along when all that was going on as you and Megan. I had marched with Martin Luther King when I was 16 in Chicago, and so I was already tied into some of that stuff. But the other thing that was interesting about Shimer in those days is because it was in Mount Carroll, it was very isolated. And unlike today, we weren't constantly inundated with media. And in fact, you could barely get a broadcast TV station in Mount Carroll. It came out of Rockford. And we didn't watch TV, we had no smartphones, we had no, I would call my parents on the payphone once a week. That was my whole connection. So you were very isolated. The other thing that was going on at Shimer at that time, as Jonathan knows, is that half the school had left the previous year. There was this thing called the grotesque internecine strife or struggle, and it was kind of just like what it sounds, an internecine, it was like who was more pure Shimer kind of stuff, and half the people left. And so they were dealing with the fallout from that, because suddenly there were half as many students, and all the financial implications of that. So, there was a lot going on.
Given that news cycle you described and not as much available news information, do you think that the Shimer curriculum and environment helped foster important discussions about events?
Oh, for sure, because you could read political science texts as part of social or whatever, historical stuff, and all that got tied into it. There was a lot of discussion of that sort of thing, and also, a third of the campus would run off on a weekend to the Pentagon to protest, okay, and then they'd come back. So there was a lot of interaction with those issues, but at the same time, it wasn't like it was constantly in your face 24/7. You had these periods that were kind of separated from that.
Do you think in the change in mediascape today, even though we have a similar political climate in terms of intensity of issues going on, do you think it's just as important that Shimer classes foster discussions such as those, have more nuanced
Oh, absolutely. I think it's even more important because it helps to understand the context behind all of those issues, and to understand that this isn't the first time humanity's ever gone through this. By the time I was a senior, I was taking courses in German fiction, and there was a lot about what was going on in the lead up to Nazi Germany and that kind of stuff, and all that tied into crap that's going on now. And if I, we felt the same way. We felt that things were out of control in some ways back then too. So yeah.
So you'd say that some like discussions you had in some literature that you engaged with at the time, whether it be because of like social issues or just your curriculum, is incredibly important today that you take with you, that you think you
for
is
sure.
relevant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all the historical context, all the philosophical context, all the sociological context. You know, we were reading David Reisman back then, and so we knew all about anomie and you know, people being isolated and all that kind of stuff. You know, those kinds of texts put all the kind of psychology of the current situation into context.
How have you used the Shimer education you've attained in your career?
I would say that I am who I am because of the Shimer education. My career goal had always been, from the time I was in high school, early in high school, was to teach college. What I knew I liked to do was read books. My mother was a teacher. My mother was a kindergarten teacher. You know, my early mentors, other than athletic coaches, because I played a lot of athletics, which sounds very North Central like, were teachers. And so that's what I aspired to do. So when I left Shimer, and I'm one of those unusual Shimer folks at the time who went through in 4 years and got a degree.
Yeah.
Okay. I started in 67, I graduated in 71. I was a conscientious objector. I'm a pacifist. I had what was called full 1IO status, and I got drafted. This was the first lottery in the Vietnam War and all that sort of thing. And so I did almost a year of alternative service, because I did get drafted and I had to serve, but in a non-combat role. And the goal coming out of Shimer was to go to graduate school, get a doctorate degree, and teach college. I did go to graduate school. I did get a master's degree, but I never taught college. So I was married. My first wife was cooking to put me through graduate school, and at a certain point we decided for me to take a leave of absence. I had a free ride for a doctorate at SUNY Binghamton in New York. While I was in Poughkeepsie, the only way I could make a living was to become a journalist. So I worked for Half Baked Cultural Weeklies. I wrote high school sports for the local daily. I ran a weekly in Beacon, New York. When I say I ran, I was editor. So that was kind of my journalistic training, was on the job. And then when we came back to Chicago in 1977, after a year, I ended up working for what was then the largest trade publishing company in the U.S., a company called Connors Publishing, Cahners. I worked for them for 18 years, mostly making magazines in food service. Obviously, I was married to a chef, but also in packaging and research and development. I was an editor, a chief editor. I became a management editor, and then I went to the business side and became a publisher, which meant that I was in charge of the whole business. Mid-90s, I left Connors, and with the help of a very rich friend, started my own magazine, and owned that and ran that for 23 years. Sold that in 2016, worked for them for a couple of years, and then left, and I still do e-newsletters in the food service equipment space. So my entire career was as a writer and journalist, business owner, and somebody who ran businesses. And the skills that Connors gave me allowed me to do a lot of those things. So obviously the verbal facility, the ability to ask questions, is core to journalism. Curiosity, like I told you, I didn't just do food service, I did packaging, I did research and development, which is like high science stuff, and NASA labs and all that stuff. Being able to do that kind of stuff, going through Nat Sci at Shimer, going through Soch at Shimer, you know, I could do all that stuff. So I would say that my career was not just influenced, but enabled, facilitated by the kind of critical thinking skills and the like that I got at Shimer.
Did you ever use any connections, or mainly stayed in like contact with like friends through your program?
Well, I've been very involved with Shimer all the way through. You know, Shimer moved from Mount Carroll in the 70s to Waukegan. I grew up in Zion, and I was living in Chicago, so we stayed very connected. I helped set up the charter for the original Shimer Alumni Association in the 80s, and I've been involved with it ever since. And I still, to this day, sit on the North Central Alumni Board as kind of a Shimer representative.
In my position, I'm a Shimer minor. I'm doing this because I'm interested in
Right.
reading and writing, but I'm not taking this into like a career in reading and writing. I want to be a clinical psychologist. How do you
Okay.
think that for people who are using a Shimer education for like supplementary?
Except maybe on the Nat Sci side, I don't think Shimer actually is intended to directly prepare you. It's not vocational training. It's intellectual training, so that you can go off and do all the other things you want to do with your life. Okay, so it teaches you how to analyze, it teaches you how to critically think, it teaches you how to communicate. We talked a lot earlier today about how the Shimer Socratic method of pedagogy helps you work better in teams, listen well, all those kinds of things that are essential for succeeding in any career. It's more providing you with tools to allow you to do the things you want to do going down the way, rather than educating you in a specific discipline or a specific skill set or whatever.
Do you think that's the most valuable part of a Shimer education, is that it's so well-rounded? Do you think that's why more people should do it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a great believer in the concepts, as I know North Central is generally, of liberal arts as a background for whatever else you want to do professionally. It's not law, it's not occupational therapy, it's not biochem research. It can help give you the skills to do those things, better. It's not vocational training. It is intellectual training and communications training and facilitation training to allow you to do those other things.
Then to finish off, is there any advice you'd want to give to the current Shimer students of this generation?
Be well, have fun. It's really important that whatever you do has some element of fun to it. I mean, not everything worth doing is fun all the time. It requires struggle, it requires effort, it requires all those things. But you've got to have fun behind it so that you want to do it.
Make it meaningful to you?
Yeah. And then do good.
All right.
You know?
Thank you for talking with me.